Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey,
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
hi everyone.
So today we're really excited to be chatting about tasks you can automate in 2022 for your business that just make sense. We're curious to know this morning if any of you in the audience have ideas for tasks that you would like to automate one day that might be repetitive or, kind of mundane for you. We were thinking we could start a chat storm this morning. So type into the question panel there on the right side of your screen. What's something that you wish you could automate? And we'll be curious to hear your ideas. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 of this webinar. All right, well, people are chatting that in this morning. Why don't we go ahead and kick things off, Sinai?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, and welcome everyone. This is our webinar for tasks that you should automate in 2022 that just make sense. I have my FME server teammates here, Mark and Laura. Yeah, the server team makes sense. We do like to automate things. We also have Chris from Customer Solutions, who probably likes to automate things just as much. We're super excited to be here. We hope you find some of these workflows useful for what you're doing, or at least inspiring. I think we'll turn off our webcams now just for the smoothest sort of streaming experience. But yeah, we'll see you at the end of the webinar. Okay, so we're going to start with an introduction of Safe Software, who we are and what we do. Then I'm going to talk about some tips and workflows for using templates, followed by a discussion from Mark and Laura about file management. Chris will show you how to triage requests when you're out of office, or maybe just need to centralize all of your notifications. And then lastly, we're going to share some resources and answer any questions you might have. Today's theme is really just an automation of your sort of more personal workflows. So sometimes we might not even notice how much time that we're losing to menial tasks and general housekeeping. File management is really a big one there that I can think of right off the bat. Emails, messages, all incoming, and these kind of tasks can actually become very obvious and annoying how much time we're spending on them. And we ask ourselves, there must be a better way of doing all this and organizing all this. We have all these apps and data sources coming in from different places. So we're going to use FME as our personal assistant today. We're going to share some of our favorite tips or ideas for automating these kinds of tasks. These workflows probably won't change the world or solve your biggest data problems, but hopefully they can save you some time, resources, and maybe just give you peace of mind. But to back it up, who are we? We are Safe Software. We make FME, and maximizing the value of your data is what we do. We've been solving data challenges for over 25 years. There's tens of thousands of organizations that are using FME, and we have lots of fantastic partners who support them around the world. We offer 3 platforms to work with. So we have FME Desktop. That's where we build all of our data workflows. FME Server is where we centralize and automate these workflows. And you may even choose to host your server remotely with FME Cloud. We also have FME Mobile for on-the-go workflows. And if you haven't had a chance to use any of these platforms before, the time is now. Please head over to safe.com, download a free trial. You can start creating your own workflows or try out some of the ones that we showed today. This slide is just to illustrate the diversity of data formats that we support. We work really hard to keep up with sort of the constantly changing world of data, and I think that's reflected here. But to get into our topic, the first topic we're going to jump into is using templating tools for quickly creating workspaces and pre-populating outputs with all of the custom formatting of an existing document or something you've created before. We thought this might be interesting because a lot of us spend time re-entering data or wrestling with documents to get just the right colors, graphs, presentation, but this time could really be spent doing other things. I'm going to start off with a couple of quick tips in the theme of templating. So we start with presets, parameter presets. These are like a small template for your readers, writers, and transformers. You can save parameter values and reuse them. Workspace templates are their own thing altogether. They allow you to save a workspace with all of its pre-designed format and structure. This sounds a lot like a regular workspace file, but it's a bit different because you can package up all of the source data sets or final data sets, the written ones, as well as the data caches inside of one template package. So this makes it very easy to send a complete workflow with all its dependencies to another user. Or if you're frequently connecting to these same data sources over and over again, or re-entering the same transformer parameters, you can save yourself a lot of setup time by using a template. Lastly, there's writer templates, and these are format specific. In general, they'll all allow you to write out new data to a new file using the formatting, design, schema, and rules of an existing file that you already have. So we're going to talk about all of these in more detail. Let's start with the first two topics. So we're going to explore presets and workspace templates in a quick flash demo. Here we're starting off with some flat file address data. And we have just one column for the address, and we want to geocode this. So when I add the geocoder and connect it to our CSV, it never has the settings that I want. So I have to spend some time configuring it. I'm going to use ArcGIS Online in this case, and we're going to use a token option. Just enter my settings. And this is taking just a little bit of time to set up. It's not hard, it just takes time. And I would like to get rid of these extra items. And I can select OK, and I can test my workspace now. And we're geocoding each of those addresses using ArcGIS Online services with my login information. And you can see that our workspace has successfully found points for each of these addresses. So we know that we set it up right. But say we're starting a new workspace or we wanted to add another geocoder. If I open it up, I'd have to set it up all over again, which can become annoying. So let's go back into this configured one. And we can save all of these settings as a preset. So if I use this menu down here, I can save it as a new preset, call it my ArcGIS Online token, and I can even set it as the default. So every time I open the geocoder, it'll open with those settings. I'll save those values. Next time I add a geocoder to my workspace, it'll open up with all of my settings as I like, or I can change it to another preset if I have maybe a couple different ways or services that I'd like to save the settings for. We can save ourselves even more time by using workspace templates. Maybe this workflow that we've set up here is a great starting point for other workflows, or maybe we'd like to share it with someone else, send it into the support team to take a look. What we can do is save it as a template. So we have a regular option to save it as a workspace, but we can also choose a template. And here we have some settings. The first thing we might notice is that it ends in FMWT, which is the template extension. We can also give it a name, category, description, or even an extended description with an overview, help page, history. And this will really help for sharing it with others. And lastly, we can also add any data. So if we want to add the CSV, we can add all of the files that are included for running this workspace. So I'll just add my addresses CSV. And now this will be sent with a package. And then we can also include the data inside of those feature caches. So this will be especially helpful if maybe our data is coming from a database that the other user can't access. We can just send the data in those caches. So I'll select OK. And now we've saved those to a template file. When I open it up, it'll come with all the data and all of the caches already loaded. So the next user can take a look at the data, take a look at your workspace, or you can start a workflow from a better starting point and save yourself some time. Okay, so let's go back to writer templates. So writer templates are totally different than presets or workspace templates. It starts with the idea that presenting our data is just as important as the transformation process in the workspace. So of course, you can use all of the styling and schema transformers to design the output. But if you've already designed the perfect file, why not just leverage that? So the typical way we can do this is by referencing that file as a template inside of a writer. Even if the file already contains data, we can populate it with new data, but it'll adopt all of the structure and the colors and the formats that you've already made elsewhere. So when you use a file that already exists, you can build your workspaces faster. The formulas and charts will always stay the same, so no small mistakes. You can use an existing work of another user. So say you have a power user on one platform like Excel or ArcGIS Pro, we can take their files that they've created and allow others to just write data to them. And also the workspace will always use the most up-to-date template file, so it's very low maintenance, and you can quickly edit those template files if you need to tweak something at a later time without having to go into the workspace and use different styling tools in that way. Not all formats have the option to use templates, but templates for geodatabases are particularly useful. So new data can adopt a structure with a complete schema, including subtypes, domains, relationships, network information, and annotation symbols. The CAD DWG templates work mostly the same. This template will give you even more control over the appearance and state of various layers, so you can reuse line styles, layer properties, custom attributes, and blocks to your output. We're not going to go into a demo for each of these, but there's tutorial content linked to the slide if you're interested. If you work with Microsoft Office Suite regularly, you probably know that a lot of time can be spent just formatting font sizes, formulas, slides, all of that. It's by no fault of the platform. There's just a lot of options. It's pretty powerful. So that's why we wanted to highlight our templates for PowerPoint, Word, and Excel today. So we're going to imagine that we've already made an Excel report exactly how we like it, but we're still getting new data coming in all the time. It comes in as a CSV. Instead of copying and pasting this file from the new table to our Excel report and trying to formulate all of those tables again and make sure there's, all of the columns line up where they should be, or wrestling with pivot tables and formulas, we can set up a FME workspace to write out the data exactly as formatted in the existing file. So we're going to start with a Excel file for this demo. And in our Excel file, you can see that we have charts, we have some summaries, more pivot tables, and the raw data is kept on this sheet. For interest, this data contains two measures. It's the spot price of oil measured in dollar per barrel. So we have Western Texas Intermediate as well as Europe Brent. This is just some free data coming from the American Energy Information Administration. But for every month, we have a mean price. And then in the final column, we have a calculated yearly mean that we've used some Excel formulas to get. And all of our other sheets are based on this raw data. And we have 2016 and 2017 here, but let's say we want to present this same report every month with new incoming CSV data. The easiest way to use this existing document as a template with FME is to create a named range. A named range in Excel is just giving one group of cells on your sheet a name. So if you go into formulas, you can highlight the cells, and then you can create a name for it. And we can leverage these in FME. Our existing named ranges are in this name manager option here. And you can see we have one called spot table that encompasses this raw data on this sheet. So we can set up our workspace to write data to this named range spot table. And a couple things to note is that the data actually starts being written at row 2. And we just have to know that. So when we set up our workspace, that's where we can start writing our data as well. So let's go over to our workspace. And our new data is coming in from a CSV, and I've added that to the workspace already. And you can see that we have the same structure as in our raw data sheet. We have the spot price in each month, as well as the year. And we also have a lot more years here than just 2016 and 2017. And we're going to use this historical data as just an example of updating that report. So the first thing we need to do is assign a number to each of these CSV rows that tells FME which Excel row to start writing to. Because in Excel, you refer to each row with its number. So we can add a counter transformer to do that. And we're going to start at row 2 because that's where, if we remember, that's where our data started. And we'll call that attribute just row. And next we want to calculate that mean value from our original worksheet. And we can do that a few different ways, but I'm just going to use the attribute manager. And I'm going to create a new attribute named mean. And I'm not going to give it a value because we're going to calculate that value. And the neat thing is that we can use Excel formulas in FME. You just have to add this dot formula. You just append that to the attribute name, and FME will know to calculate it, not to write it out as a string. And we want to calculate the mean, and we're not doing that in FME. We want to do that using the Excel formulas. So to quickly find our formula, we can go back to our sheet. Remember here, we're calculating the mean already, so we can just copy that back to our workspace, and we can paste it here. And since we created some row values, we can make this dynamic. So for every row, we want to calculate the mean. So I'll use our row attribute there, select OK, and OK. And now we can just run it to make sure that we've created all the formulas. You can see here we have our mean that's empty, but FME is going to calculate this Excel formula and put it into our mean attribute. Okay, so now we're ready to write it to Excel and create our report using that template. So we can add a writer. Just start typing, can type in Excel. We can choose a location to write it to. And I'll call it spot data historic. Okay, and then we want to make sure that we automatically create attributes. And then we have to open the parameters to start using a template. So we overwrite the existing file. And then what we can do is select a template. So we can just select an Excel workbook, select it here, press OK. And when we add the Excel reader to our canvas, it'll just ask us to set it up. So in our sheet name, this is where we're going to reference the sheet and named range that we want to write to. So we know our sheet name is called raw data, and our named range is spot table. So we just do a slash and we write in spot table. And we also just want to make sure that we are truncating the existing sheet named range. So we're not appending data, we're writing in new data. So just select OK. And I can connect it to our attribute manager. We can take a look and see all of our columns are right. And I've just noticed that we have this row attribute. We don't want that, so we can open this back up, go into our user attributes, and instead of automatic, I'm going to switch it over to manual and delete that row value because we don't want to write out the row number. That's just for our reference. Okay, so let's run the workspace. We should create a new Excel report based on our updated data, but we should have all of the tables and the updated raw data in that Excel workbook. So let's take a look at what we've created. And this is the old Excel sheet here. We can see we just have 2016 and 2017. Okay, so here is our new Excel report. And on this page, we can see that we've inserted our new data. It doesn't have the fancy headers, but that's okay. That's not the important part. What we did want to see here is our calculated mean, which looks good. Looks like we've calculated a yearly mean for each of these rows. And then if we go into our other sheets here, we have our summaries and charts. We have another pivot table, another pivot table, but they're all populated with our newest data here. And that's what we wanted to see, an updated report made with new incoming data, but retaining all of the formatting that we've already went through the trouble of making. So that concludes how to create reports from existing Excel documents using a template. And although we just created that workspace, I'll just mention that we could easily publish that workspace to FME server and have that just scan, say, a directory for newest CSV files and create reports with updated or newly created CSVs, and you'd really have a front-end automation for creating reports with whatever frequency you'd like. You could also set it up on an email inbox, anything, and it would create reports using that template file with the new data each time. A couple takeaways are that named ranges are really key to using Excel with templates. That's how FME can know where to write the data. We can also use all these Excel formulas in FME and automate the math part of it. Obviously, that was a very simple example, just using the mean, but we could create something much more complicated if we needed to. Set up the writer to truncate the data each time so that the reports aren't appending, but replacing the data with the new data and not just creating a giant Excel workbook. But you could do that as well if you wanted to. But yeah, I hope that this either is really helpful directly to your workflows or at least inspires you to start using FME with the Microsoft Office suite, especially if you've already got a bunch of stuff created in there. You can just leverage that for some quick workflows. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mark and Laura to start talking about file management in using FME.
Awesome. Thank you, Sinai. So now we are going to be going through our file management examples where I'll be going through the process of automatically archiving files, and Laura will be going through automatic code deployment. So I'll be taking us through one of our examples of an automated file management task, but before that, I want to talk about how this demo shows a different side of FME. So when we think of FME, the first things that come to mind are data translations, application integration, and automations. But something we don't often think about is FME's key role when it comes to the management of files themselves, whether it's something simple like naming a file based on an attribute or parameter, zipping an output, or getting into more advanced processes like dataset fanouts. A useful writer in FME that helps with file management is the file copy writer, which can copy and move files. So in this scenario, we have a directory watch automation in FME server, and we want to process incoming shapefiles of building footprints, update our footprints database, and move the shapefiles to an internal file system afterwards. A use case like this could be monitoring a public directory, an FTP site, or a storage site, and moving the files to a different destination when they're processed, so you never need to manually clean out the file drop site yourself. Or you could do the reverse and move the file internally before processing. So the solution for this challenge is adding an additional workspace to the end of the automation that contains a directory and path reader and a file copy writer. Both are set to be dynamic, so they can accept any incoming shapefiles from the directory watch and move them to our destination directory. So this comes with a couple of advantages, with the most important being saving time on manually managing your files by automatically processing and moving files and creating directories to organize your files. An optional use case includes automatically sharing files with relevant stakeholders. So now we're just going to jump into the demo. So you can see here, this is the automation that I showed in the earlier slide, where we're starting off with our directory watch trigger in the automation, and we are monitoring a directory in our resource system where we're watching for new building footprint shapefiles. And I've set it to watch for new files that are dropped in, and we're pulling it at a fairly frequent interval. You'll notice that the next action is not a workspace, but it's actually a filter message action. So the reason why I have this here is because if you're familiar with shape files, you'll know that they come with sidecar files along with them. So you can see here with update 5, it's not just a .shp, but it also includes 3 other sidecar files. So when this happens and those files are uploaded to the directory, that would set off 4 separate events for each of those files, but you only want one automation run for this one shapefile. So what you do is you go into the filter message action, and you can select the directory watch key here that points to the file path that it detected. And what this does is that it only passes through the file that has the .shp extension, so that you're only getting one event for that set of files. And this reduces any excessive work that runs in your automation, and also prevents errors from happening, because obviously your workspace is not going to be able to read the .dbf file as a shapefile. So once that passes through, then we have our footprints updating workspace here, and you can see that I've selected another key, the same one that we were filtering on, that will automatically fill in our source shapefile parameter with that file path that comes from the directory watch, and then updates our Spatialite database. And you can see that I'm pointing to it through this parameter. And in whatever use case that you have, whatever database you're using, whether it be a connection, you can set it up however you like here. And just to show what this workspace is actually doing, it's fairly simple. It's just taking in that shapefile, doing some basic validation on it, comparing it to the original database, and then looking for any changes such as inserts and updates, and then writes it out to the database. And then once this successfully completes, it runs our file archiving workspace. So you'll see here that we have 3 parameters, with the first being the file root name. So this is actually just taking the name of the file that was just processed, excluding the extension. And then we're taking that in, and then we are watching the source folder that the file came from, and then we are moving it into the destination folder. And to go into the workspace, actually see what this is doing, we're starting off with our path reader, and we've set it to be dynamic. And then what I'm doing right now is that I'm actually just reading from a local file system, so we can see what's actually happening. So you'll see I have in my Dropbox updates 5 and update 3, and you can see that it read all those in, along with a lot of other information about these files themselves, such as the different path for Unix systems or Windows systems, that this is compatible with whatever operating system you're running FME on. And then I'm just testing to make sure that I'm only picking up the file root name that matches with what I'm looking at, because if multiple files are in the Dropbox at the same time, I only want to archive the one that was processed, and I don't want to move everything at once, or else that's going to cause errors for other jobs that are trying to run. So currently in my test, I set it up to just pick up the update 3 file, and then it's creating a bunch of extra attributes that are required to then run our file copy writer. So even though we call it the file copy writer, it actually is capable of moving and copying files, which can be configured in the source parameters. As you can see here, that's where I've set the file operation. And you have a lot of other options on how you want your file management and the movement to work when you're running this writer, such as copying source folders, setting up subfolders, whether you want this to overwrite an existing file or not. And you can also set it to error out if certain scenarios occur, such as a non-existent source or an invalid destination. And once this is set up and you run this workspace, that will just move those files over. So you can see in a moment, update 3 is going to move over to my archive file into its own individual subfolder. So now we're going to run this on our FME server. So I'm just going to get this started and then go into my Dropbox for new building footprints. Going to go into the files that I want to move over. So let's just take updates 2 and move and upload that into the directory. And in a moment, you will see that the automation will kick off. So just to monitor that, we'll go into the log file. And you'll see that 4 new files, including the sidecar files, have been picked up. The job has successfully run for that footprint update. And then when I go into the resources and refresh this, you'll see that the files have been moved into the archive, just as I had shown earlier. And then I've also added a bit of extra functionality to the end where it is actually sending an email notification to myself if it succeeds or fails. And since this one succeeded without any issues, I got a notification with all information about that specific footprint update. So that brings us to the end of my own demo. And so the key takeaways from this is that why would you manually deal with file management yourself when FME can do that work for you with a combination of a path reader and a directory writer? So you can enhance your automations with these readers and writers and whatever scenario that you have that this can be used in. And 2 tips to take away from this is that the file copy writer can both copy and move files, and you have a lot of extra parameters to configure the way you want it to behave with your files and folders. And the second tip is to make use of the filter action in your automations to pass through various events and messages so that you can actually control the behavior of files, especially when there are data formats that involve sidecar files like shapefiles. This way, you don't need to force your users to zip them up before submitting them, and you're just letting FME server do the work for them. And now I'm going to pass it on to Laura.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of continue on with the concept of file management and automating, moving things from place to place with FME and FME server. So in this example, I'm going to talk about, this is a scenario kind of taken from kind of a real world example, some files that we have to deal with here in support at SAFE. So this relates to safe.com/demos page. So this is a page on our website that shows a bunch of live interactive demos showing off different aspects of FME. Many of these are FME server apps, so they're all hosted by FME server with no code involved. But there are a few here that are kind of custom JavaScript-based web pages. So those are things that we manage in the support team. So with these, we store the code in GitHub so that we can share that out easily. But the web pages themselves are hosted through Amazon's AWS S3 buckets. So when we make updates to our web applications, typically the process will look like this. We'll do the edits to the code on our local systems. Then we'll push those changes up to GitHub. So that goes up to the public-facing GitHub repository where people can download the code themselves to use. In addition to that, when we've made those changes, we also need to remember to copy all of the HTML and JavaScript files over to S3 so that we can update the live demos on our web page. That step was always a little bit of a manual process. I'd have to make my change to GitHub, make sure everything's good, then go find the files that I need to move across and upload those to Amazon. And that would update the main page here. So what we'd like to do is to make updating these apps a one-step process instead. So I'd like to do is just be able to make my changes, push those to GitHub, and let FME take care of putting files where they need to be. So we needed a way to automatically update that S3 bucket whenever the changes were pushed to GitHub. So the solution here is to use webhooks in GitHub, so I'll show you what those look like, and using FME server to trigger a workspace to handle moving those files where they need to go. So anytime that webhook in GitHub is triggered, it'll tell FME server to run a workspace and move my files around. So the result would be having my apps that can be simply updated by pushing changes to GitHub, letting FME take care of the rest. We'll get into a demo of how this looks. So I'll start on the GitHub repository side. So these repositories already exist for all these demos online. So this is my sample demo here that I'm just using for an example during this webinar. In GitHub, under settings, we have webhooks. So this allows me to input a URL that GitHub will post to whenever a change is made to the repository. So if I was to add a webhook here, it asks me for my payload URL, and I can set the content type. So I typically use JSON when working with FME server. So for that URL, I can use an automation to set up a URL to receive that payload. So I'll head back into FME server here. I've got an automation already set up to handle this. So I'm using a webhook trigger in this case. So this provides a URL. So I'm using an FME Cloud instance. This is a public-facing URL. I can copy that out. And I simply pasted that into the webhook in GitHub. So whenever content is pushed to this repository, I'm going to get a notification in FME server with information about what just happened. I can also choose what information I'd like. So I just want the push event in this case, but I could select individual events that I wanted to track as well. In this automation, we'll just start at the beginning here. I'm just going to have my webhook and my log action just to see what information comes through. So I have this set up. So what I'll do is go into GitHub. So I've made a little change to my repository here. So I'm just going to push that up to production. So I'll push that to github.com. That will trigger the webhook to send a post request to FME server. It'll go into my automation, and we're going to log that content. So if I look in my automation now, I can see here what the information was that came through. So this is the content of that push from GitHub. There's a lot of information in this. This is telling me who made the push to GitHub, what files were changed, and all that good stuff. So what I'd like to do next is create a workspace that will take this JSON blob and parse that out and pull out the information I care about. So I have that workspace already built here. First thing I needed for this workspace was a published parameter to accept the JSON document. So I just created that. That's just a simple text parameter. I've got a sample document here for testing. And then the workspace itself. So it pulls the data from that parameter using the parameter fetcher transformer. And then I'm using a series of JSON flatteners to start breaking down that information to pull out the pieces I care about. From there, you can see there's a fair bit going on in this. What I needed to do was then start looking at that data and see what's in there and pull out the pieces that I care about. So first, I'm pulling out who made the changes. So I'm getting the email address and the name of the person who made the change, so I can send them an email after the fact to let them know if their updates were successful. Then I'm doing a series of tests just to make sure the data I was expecting is coming through. From there, I can check if the S3 bucket already exists, just to make sure there's no issues with the demo itself. And then I'm filtering on the files that were changed. So I'm handling things that were added or modified, as well as files that may have been deleted through the change I made to GitHub. From there, I can download those files from GitHub using a series of HTTP callers and upload those to S3 using the S3 connector transformer. Doing a similar process for deletes using the S3 connector to delete the files from the S3 bucket, anything that was removed. After that, I create a little report of what happened. So I list out what files were changed and what those file names were. And I'm sending that out through an automations writer here. So this is going to let me customize the email that is sent back to the end user, and it also has the email address of that user. Throughout all of this, you can see on some of these rejected ports, I have connections pointing down to my error handling section of the workspace. This is another important piece here. So anytime something goes wrong, I'm able to trap that information, and then I'm creating a separate email here in case of failures to summarize exactly what went wrong and tell the user how to fix that. So heading back to FME server here, I've got the rest of my automation set up. So this is the workspace that I'd created in desktop. I published that up to FME server, and I'm using it here. I am passing the content of my webhook directly in through the webhook JSON data parameter. So that'll change dynamically based on what I do in GitHub. And then this is the output ports for that automations writer that I added to my workspace. So if the updates failed, I'm going to send a custom email to the user who made the update to GitHub to let them know there was a failure and to list out exactly what happened. I'm doing the same on a successful update. So this was set up earlier when I made that push to GitHub. So if I go back to my email now, I can see I got an email from FME server letting me know that my changes were successful, and I have a list of the files that were changed, just the one HTML. I can also come back and check the S3 bucket for this. You can see it was last updated at 10:22. If I refresh, I should see that has changed, and I have the newest copy of the file just about noon here. So some tips and tricks from this. Yeah, webhooks can be very powerful. If you'd like FME server to be able to react to something in real time as changes happen, if the application you're working with has support for webhooks, those are fantastic to be able to use to create some automatic integration between your different apps. The other tip here, HTTP callers and web connections to interact with systems without a reader or writer. Yeah, it's a very powerful way to be able to connect to data you may not otherwise be able to access directly in FME if there isn't a specific reader or writer for it. So in my case, I was able to create a GitHub web connection and use an HTTP caller to connect to my GitHub account to interact with the files that were there. And finally, error handling. It's one of those things that's not maybe the most glamorous aspect of FME, but it is very important. Making use of those rejected ports and being able to direct the data from those into a report to summarize when things go wrong is invaluable. So if something breaks in my workflow, I know exactly what happened with this particular one. It's a complicated workspace, so it is tricky to track otherwise. So it's nice to be able to create my own report and to give myself information and feedback about what's going on. I think with that, I'm going to pass over to Chris to finish us up here today.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And yeah, today we're going to be finishing off with triaging incoming requests using services like Slack for notifications, as well as things like Gmail. You could use things like Microsoft Teams and any other internal messaging systems as well. But then in this context, we're going to be working with Salesforce and Slack. So there's a little bit of a motivation for this. We here at Say Software need to have the ability to monitor cases while people go out of office. Again, we're going to use Salesforce and Slack in this case, but you could use this for things like Jira, any customer relationship management system, or project management related management systems as well. It'll all be relevant. So a couple of years ago, I came across this YouTube video that explained how to prepare for vacation so nothing goes wrong. And it went through a bunch of reasons why you shouldn't take vacation and how to prepare for it when you're going for an extended stay. And the driving force really, the end message rather, is that no matter how much planning you can do, there's no getting away from email responses while you're away. Customers or emails coming in, they're always going to come in because the business has to keep going while you're away. And this could be from internal customers or external as well. So with my friend the Lizard, we came up with a little bit of a list and a little bit of a solution to this problem, because you should be able to enjoy your time off when you're off on vacation. So for some more context on why this was a bit of a problem at Safe, in the past, Safers would, for their cases that they had ownership of, they would ask other support specialists to watch them while they're away, but this wasn't really convenient and it didn't really keep track of who the temporary owner of the case was. And if that person was covering, what if they got sick? What's going to happen to that case now? There's a lot more moving parts to this, so there's a couple of different ways that you could handle this, and we've come up with an automation that seems to be working for us so far. So automating triage at Safe with Salesforce in the past, or not in the past rather, with Salesforce, support specialists will own cases. So this means once you accept a case into your case queue, you are the owner of it. It's like it's coming to your own personal email address. The problem with this is that Salesforce doesn't really have an out-of-office notifier. They do have case notifications using what's called the case team, but this is also kind of it can be a bit detached because again, if that person who's on the case team is away, then there's not as much visibility as to who's going to be taking the case should someone be away and an incoming request comes in. So the solution here is going to be to schedule a job to run, which is going to scan a personal queue and post notifications to an internal chat so that the work can be assigned based on availability. Of course, whenever you're covering for someone else, you have your own work to do as well. So this is why when you post it to an internal messaging system, something like Teams or Slack, it will be a bit more advantageous because you'll have the collaboration factor where you can chat with your team and assign based on who has the most availability and the know-how to address the issue. So there's two main reasons why we wanted to go ahead with this project. And the first being, we want to ensure our customers are supported while getting support specialists, while our support specialists are off on vacation. We also want to ensure support specialists don't come back to a queue rather, full of cases. So in this screenshot, you can see that this isn't real data, but you can see that Pete White has reached out to the new user owner 4 or 5 times and they haven't really gotten a response. No one wants to be in this situation, whether you're the customer or the support specialist. This isn't a good look for either side because someone's clearly waiting for work on the other and they're not getting any support. So this happens oftentimes when you do want to go on vacation. In a lot of cases, there's going to be a customer, whether that's an internal or an external customer, they're going to have a medium to high priority issue and they're going to reach out to you directly. So this could take away from your much needed relaxing time when your team could be helping you out with this using an automated triaging system like this. So all that it's going to take is to use a couple of workspaces. We can do this with just 2 workspaces. The first one will be very basic. We're just going to reach out for 3 parameters. The published parameters are going to ask for your name. So in this case, we have a directory of all of our employees who are eligible for this application, or the schedule rather. We're going to ask, when are you leaving the office and when do you come home from the office? It's really as simple as that. So let's actually go ahead and look at this application. So let's say I'm going to be going on vacation. I'll go down to my name. When does my vacation start? I'm going to prepare for my next month's vacation, which I'll take on the 1st. And I'm feeling like I need a much needed break, so I'll take a full week off. So I can click OK. And at this point, FME Server is running a job that's essentially going to create a schedule using the FME Server REST API. And that job is going to create, it's simply going to run a workspace that's going to do a scan of my personal queue on Salesforce. And if there's any cases with a response, it'll post them to my team chat. So we'll take a quick look at the schedule that it's just created. Give it a refresh. I just updated it. And we can see that there's the schedule that was created. So because we have that list of all of the employees, we're going to use those names to our advantage. There's going to be multiple people who will book vacation, so we don't want to use one single schedule because it'll just overwrite itself. We need to make it unique to the individual. So I can click here, and we can see that my new schedule has been created for February 1st for that full week. So this is going to run a job once a day, every day at 10 a.m., Monday to Friday, just for regular business hours. And it's just going to run one workspace, which we will take a look at now. Back to full screen. Okay, so it's a very basic workspace that's going to be run. I don't need to hop into Workbench because it is really as simple as 4 transformers. All we're going to be doing is reaching out to Salesforce using a Salesforce connector. And this again is going to look into my support queue. So this is going to look into my personal queue for any cases that have the status with support. In this case, anything that's flagged as with support indicates that a customer has responded and is waiting on action from me. From there, we're simply going to expose a couple of attributes and then post it to Slack. It's really that straightforward. We're grabbing all the case information from Salesforce. We're grabbing things like the link, the case number, and we're posting it to our internal message board. There's one aspect that we want to be consider here as well. So with the Slack connector, or whether you're using Teams or any other messaging system, you don't want to necessarily write this out to a general channel that has a bunch of people in your organization. You want to have it specific to a team that's going to be appropriate for these types of questions. So in this case, we have a greater support channel at Safe Software. We don't necessarily want to post it to that channel. Instead, we're going to break it down to our sub channels. So my team of 6, I can post it directly to that team. So all of the work that is relevant to me likely can be addressed by one of my colleagues. So every day at 10 a.m., this is the case that we're going to have run in this example. We'll have a out of office case queue monitor bot. It's going to post a message or two to Slack. and it's going to post an individual message for each case that has that with support status. So this is going to allow the team to do a couple of things. First, it gives great visibility for the team leads. They can see everything that's coming in and everything that needs to be triaged and assigned for coverage. So you can see here with something like Slack as well, you also have the ability to use emojis. So you can use an emoji to indicate that I can take that first case. So if I know the answer to that C151586 case, I can indicate that with putting my hand up or just doing a simple check mark. If I don't happen to know the answer, but I have a general idea of what it might be, and I want to work on this with my colleagues, I also have the ability to use something like threading. So I can open a thread on that message and I can chat with the rest of my team, and together we can come together and build a solution, create an answer, and then get an email sent out. So that's why using something like Slack or Teams is advantageous in this case, instead of going to a direct email. You can, however, if you do want this to go to one specific person, you can definitely use those direct messages or use email services. All of these are options, or even an SMS service using something like Twilio as well, if you need it to go to a specific person. But again, that kind of runs that risk of if that person is off, what happens with the work? It could just be sitting idle and waiting for both people to come back. So there, again, is a couple of main reasons for this. We want you to enjoy your time off while you're away. So this always comes back to the main issue of you want the person who's taking time off to enjoy that time off. You want them to come back nice and refreshed, so they don't have to come back to that queue full of cases or other work that's been piled up on their desk. Let them come back nice and refreshed, and also let your customers make sure they're not being left in the dark, whether those are internal or external customers. Because like I mentioned, the show must go on, that your business is going to run as usual. You want the work to be covered and not just sitting waiting for someone to come back to respond to it. So there's a couple of other concepts and other considerations with collaborative triaging when you're automating these things, because of course this applies to more than just Salesforce. You can use this with project management software like Jira, Monday, Asana, etc. Anything like that that has an API, you can connect to it as well and run it in tandem with this workspace or with this process rather. You can also use other notification services. So as I mentioned, we showed Slack in this instance. You could definitely use Teams. If you wanted to do an email, you could send it to a group email. Or again, if you wanted to define it to a specific individual, you can define that all in the workspace and have the work sent directly to those people. The other thing you want to consider here is going to be the scheduled frequency. So in our case, we only needed it to run one time a day around 10 a.m. That's just because when someone is covering for your work, of course, you have your own work to take on top of this. So we didn't want to overwhelm the channel by posting it every hour. Instead, once a day around 10 a.m. was deemed appropriate for us because that covers our East Coast and our West Coast staff. If you needed something to be a little bit more real time, as Laura just mentioned, you do have the ability to use webhooks as well. And a webhook could be used in this case to kick off an automation, which again would just do the automated triaging for you. So there's a lot of different options that you have here. A lot of different systems that it could tie into, whether that's something like Salesforce, Slack, Microsoft Dynamics, or Microsoft Teams. You have the option to automate this triage process, whether it's for a process that's covering for vacation time, or if you need this to run on a daily schedule for just general automated routing, that is definitely possible. So stop wasting time performing these tedious tasks when FME can do it for you. We want to help you guys show the way. We want to help to show the way that making all these automations are possible and help to free up the work to make you able to do more meaningful work instead of having these tedious repetitive tasks bogging down your day. So if you are new to FME, please feel free to download FME 2021.2, or if you're an existing customer, definitely download and upgrade to 21.2. You can get a couple of workspaces from this webinar, and we want to see what kind of work you can get out from this. If you have any successes or failures with this, we'd love to hear back from you, whether that's coming onto our Salesforce or onto our live chat rather, or our community forum. We'd love to hear what you're using FME to automate for your daily tasks. All right, and that wraps up today's webinar. I'll pass it off to Elizabeth for the community code.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So as a thank you to all of you for joining us today, we do have a community badge code to share with you all. So today's code is ASMBG, and the URL to redeem this is fme.ly/webinar badge. So I'll drop that in the chat now as well in case you missed this slide. So yeah, you can redeem a community badge for joining us this morning. The peak of data integration, our 2022 UC. We're all eagerly anticipating this. August 24th to 26th, it's been a long time coming. We have a link there to apply to present and also to register. I think we're still in early bird savings actually, so definitely take advantage of that if you haven't already. And check out our upcoming and on-demand webinars. We have a lot of great content coming up in the next couple months here, safe.com/webinars, and a lot of great content that we've had in the past couple months. So lots of on-demand webinars to check out. All right, and it does look like we have a few minutes left for some Q&A here this morning. So if you do have any questions, be sure to leave those in the question panel for us now. And it does look like we had a lot of questions that came in during the webinar, which is awesome. So thank you so much to everyone for dropping your questions in. You kept the team busy for sure, so that's awesome.
And a lot of great use cases came in as well. So thank you for shouting those out at the very beginning of the webinar. It's always great to hear what you guys are doing and what we need to build for more learning resources and other webinar content as well. Yeah, does anyone have any questions that really stand out that would be useful to share to the audience? Or
Just looking through, there was one related to Sanai's demo about named ranges in Excel. So how do you handle those if they're not, I guess if the data that you're sending into the named range isn't consistently the same length?
Yeah, using named ranges, it's not limited to the length of the original named range that you make. FME with the writer, how we specify the sheet name and then we specify the named range after the slash. We're going to be recreating that named range in Excel. So in my example, we only had the 2 years of data, so there was only a few rows in the original Excel sheet. But then when we rewrote the new data with the historical, it had maybe 20 plus years of data, so a lot more rows. But FME was able to dynamically recreate that named range with a lot more features. So you don't have to be worried that you have to write the exact same number of rows every single time. Yeah, great question.
Awesome. I think there were also a couple of questions related to the demos. So a few people were interested in getting copies of some of the workspaces and the information we were sharing in the webinar today.
Yeah, I can take that one. So following the webinar later today, we'll be sure to send out the recording, resources, yeah, and any workspaces to everyone via email.
awesome. And then, yeah, I think there was another, there are 2 questions that are slightly different from each other, but it's always one that we do like to highlight here. Someone was asking about the geocoder service and if you have the option to use different geocoder services. And another one was, do you have a WebEx connector transformer? The answer to both of those is if we don't have the geocoder service that you can always build it with an HTTP caller. So anything that has an API, whether that's the WebEx connector or a geocoding service, you can create those using an HTTP caller transformer. That's just our transformer that allows you to reach out to any service using REST calls or anything like that. So yeah, lots of flexibility with that transformer and allows you to build really custom solutions if we don't already have a connector, a transformer, or a reader writer for it. So
Yeah, and just to add on to that, we had a couple of users asking about REST APIs, and just to let you know that FME server does have a REST API. So using the same method that Chris described with HTTP callers, you can build different types of automations or tasks that integrate and work with FME server. So you can do, let's say, user management or running certain tasks with our REST API.
Yeah, and just to build off of that as well, with the geocoding service, if you are interested in using another one other than ArcGIS Online in our built-in services, we also offer quite a few others in that same transformer that I used in my workflow. So just so you're aware, you can use your connection information to use ArcGIS Online as well as Bing, Google, Here, IPStack, OpenStreetMap. I think there's quite a few others as well. So have a look there first and see if what you want is already built in.
Awesome. Okay, and with that, thank you so much everyone for joining us this morning. There is a 4 multiple choice question survey that will launch at the end of the webinar. Let us know your feedback from this morning. We always love to see how we can improve. Thanks to the whole team as well of our presenters.
Awesome. Thanks so much for everyone.
Everyone, yeah.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Hi, everyone.